The dark, rainy prehistoric pine forest stretches out in every direction, an endless ocean of deep green and heavy grey shadows. The Pleistocene rain does not merely fall, it hammers against the ancient earth with a steady and rhythmic eternal weight. Thick curtains of freezing water cascade through the canopy of the ancient pines, washing over the rugged landscape in a relentless, hypnotic downpour. But here, tucked beneath the immense weight of a stone cliff, there is a sanctuary. It is a dry, hollowed-out limestone cave, a quiet pocket of warmth hidden away from the raging, freezing world outside. Sitting deep within the shadows of this dry cave is a man, entirely still, entirely at peace with the storm that howls beyond his threshold. He is a Neanderthal, a quiet master of this harsh, beautiful world, resting safely within the ancient stone walls that protect him. His broad, heavy shoulders relax beneath the thick, tanned hide of a cave bear, the fur radiating a deep, comforting warmth against the chill of the damp air. He sits cross-legged on the dusty, dry cave floor, his chest rising and falling in a slow and deep, unbroken rhythm. He is looking peacefully downward, his eyes reflecting the soft, warm orange glow of a dying fire. Before him, hanging from the edge of a blackened, fire-hardened stick, a thick droplet of black birch tar is slowly, silently forming. It gathers weight, swelling in the soft heat of the embers, thick and rich and completely black against the glowing red coals. He watches it with infinite patience, his face calm, as the thick black pitch finally releases its hold. The heavy drop falls perfectly and silently into a small, dry clay pot resting in the warm dust below. Outside the mouth of the cave, the world is a heavy, freezing sheet of grey water and violently bending pine trees. The wind howls down the narrow river valley, a deep, mournful sound that strips the last dead leaves from the trembling branches. It is a night that belongs entirely to the cold, a night where the ancient ice seems to breathe across the land. Every gust of wind carries the bitter, stinging bite of the deep frost, a reminder of the unforgiving wildness of the Pleistocene earth. But the freezing wind cannot reach him here. The violent storm is stopped dead at the jagged stone mouth of the cave, unable to penetrate the quiet, invisible wall of radiant heat. Deep inside the limestone walls, the air is perfectly, wonderfully dry. The atmosphere here is still and thick, and undisturbed by the chaos of the shifting winds. It smells deeply of damp stone, ancient earth, and the rich, comforting scent of old wood smoke settling into the dust. The storm outside is violent and loud, but in here the silence is thick and heavy, wrapping around the space like a warm, familiar blanket. The only sound inside this sanctuary is the soft, rhythmic hissing of the coals, a gentle, breathing sound that lulls the mind to rest. The man breathes with the fire, inhaling the warm, dry air deeply into his lungs, letting it fill his chest with a heavy, grounding comfort. He exhales slowly, a long, quiet sigh that pushes away the exhaustion of the day, leaving only a profound, physical stillness. He is a creature of the Middle Paleolithic, intimately tied to the rhythms of the earth, the fire and the changing skies. To him, the storm is not an enemy, nor is it a source of fear or anxiety. It is simply the way of the world, a natural turning of the sky, and he has long ago mastered the art of outlasting it. He knows exactly what the forest provides, and he knows exactly how to coax warmth from the freezing dark. His body is built for this world, thick-boned and powerful, designed to carry immense weight and endure the deepest, longest winters. Yet right now, that immense strength is entirely at rest, soft and loose under the heavy weight of the thick fur hide. The cave bear fur is thick and dense, and perfectly insulated, holding the heat of his body in a tight, protective cocoon. He can feel the soft texture of the hide against his neck, a constant, physical reminder that he is safe, that he is sheltered, that he is warm. Beyond the cave mouth, the heavy rain continues to drum against the rocks, an endless, hypnotic patter of water against stone. The sound is mesmerizing, a constant, rolling wave of white noise that washes away thought, leaving only sensation. Water pools on the jagged edges of the cliff above, dripping down in slow, heavy droplets that splash gently onto the muddy earth outside. Each drop is a ticking clock, a quiet measure of time passing in a night where time truly means nothing at all. Inside, the light is soft and warm and entirely forgiving. The deep, jagged fissures of the limestone ceiling are painted in shifting shades of dark orange and gentle gold. The shadows in the cave do not jump or leap, they sway slowly, rocking back and forth with the gentle, dying breath of the embers. It is a deeply comforting light, the kind of light that makes the eyelids feel heavy, that makes the muscles long for sleep. The man shifts his weight slightly on the dusty floor, the fine, dry dirt compacting softly beneath him. He feels the solid, unchanging foundation of the earth holding him up, rooting him securely to this quiet spot. He brings his hands together in his lap, letting them rest in the brightest pool of radiant warmth cast by the coals. His hands are massive, heavily collaged, stained with soot and the dark, rich soil of the pine forest. They are the hands of a builder, a hunter, a survivor, hands that know the exact texture of every rock, every branch, every leaf. Slowly and deliberately, he turns his right hand over, exposing the thick, leathery palm to the soft orange light of the fire. Running across the center of his palm is a deep, stinging cut. It is the sharp, unforgiving bite of a slipped flint blade, an accident from earlier in the day when the cold made his fingers slow. The cut is fresh and tight, and throbbing with a dull, constant ache that radiates up his thick forearm. He looks at the wound without anger, without frustration, and entirely without fear. Pain is simply a messenger, a quiet signal from the body, and he listens to it with the same calm patience he gives the falling rain. He closes his massive hand into a loose fist, feeling the tight pull of the skin, the deep, warm sting echoing in the quiet cave. He opens his hand again, letting the radiant heat of the glowing coals wash over the cut, offering a small, temporary comfort. The few drops of thick, black birch pitch he gathered earlier in the clay pot will not be enough for a wound this deep. He will need more of the dark, sweet-smelling medicine to seal the cut, to draw out the pain, and to pull the heat from the swelling skin. He does not know the invisible, microscopic forces that cause wounds to fester, nor does he know the names of the ancient bacteria that sleep in the soil, but he knows the cure. He knows the ancient alchemy of the forest, passed down through countless generations of quiet nights spent beside the fire. He knows that when the white bark of the birch tree is heated in the deep, airless dark of the white ash, it bleeds a miracle. He knows that the thick, sticky black tar will numb the sharpest sting, cooling the fire in his hand and sealing the flesh away from the dirt. The thought of the medicine brings a deep wave of relief crashing softly over his mind. He looks toward the back of the small cave, where a neat, carefully gathered stack of papery white birch bark waits in the shadows. He had peeled it from the silent, white-trunked trees long before the dark storm clouds gathered, knowing the rain was coming. The bark is perfectly dry and crisp, and ready to yield its dark, healing blood to the heat of the stones. He slowly lowers his injured hand, letting it rest gently on the soft fur of the cave-bear hide covering his knees. He looks back down into the heart of the fire, watching the deep, pulsing red core of the coals breathing in the dark. The flames are gone, but the heat remains, a heavy, silent force waiting to be commanded. Outside, the freezing wind wails again, a long, hollow sound that fades gently into the steady drumming of the endless rain. Inside, the man takes another slow, deep breath, perfectly safe, perfectly calm, ready to begin the slow work of healing. The quiet rhythm of the man's breathing fills the small, sheltered space of the cave, a slow and steady tide that rises and falls beneath the heavy cave bare hide. He does not move quickly. In this ancient, frozen world, sudden movement is a waste of warmth, a waste of energy that the body fights so desperately to keep. He remains perfectly still, allowing the heavy, comforting weight of the silence inside the cave to wash over him, layer by layer, burying the exhaustion of the long day. Outside, the Pleistocene storm continues its violent, relentless assault on the dark pine forest. The sound of the rain is a massive, crushing weight of water. Millions of freezing drops hammering against the jagged limestone cliff above. It is a chaotic, deafening roar out in the open, but deep inside the throat of the cave, the sound is muffled, softened into a deep, continuous drone. It becomes a heavy blanket of white noise that wraps around the mind, pulling it gently downward into a state of profound lethargy. Every few moments, the wind shifts, roaring fiercely down the narrow river valley and throwing a mist of freezing rain against the rocks at the entrance. But the water cannot reach him. The cold cannot touch him. He is anchored in the absolute dry safety of the dust, sitting exactly where the invisible boundary of the fire's radiant heat pushes back against the bitter frost. The contrast between the lethal, freezing dark outside and the gentle, life-saving warmth inside makes the heavy air of the cave feel impossibly sweet. The dull, throbbing ache in his massive, calloused hand pulses in time with his slow heartbeat. The deep cut from the slipped flint blade is a tight, stinging line across his palm, a sharp reminder of the fragile nature of flesh against stone. But the pain does not cause his heart rate to rise. It does not bring panic. It is merely a sensation, a quiet puzzle that he already knows exactly how to solve. He knows the ancient alchemy of the forest. He knows that the cure is waiting within the wood, waiting to be drawn out by the heat. Slowly and deliberately, the Neanderthal shifts his weight on the cave floor. The dry, powdery dust beneath him compresses softly, shifting to accommodate the heavy, muscular frame of his body. The thick cave bear hide drapes over his broad shoulders, the long, dense fur brushing quietly against the rough limestone wall behind him. The friction of the fur against the stone makes a soft, rhythmic shushing sound, a quiet whisper in the warm dark. He reaches out with his uninjured hand, his thick, soot-stained fingers uncurling with slow, practiced grace. Beside his crossed legs rests a long, thick branch of dead mountain pine. It is an old tool, stripped of its bark long ago, its surface polished smooth by the oils of his hands and the endless passage of time. One end of the thick branch is heavily charred, blackened and cracked from countless nights spent pushing and shaping the heart of the flames. His massive fingers wrap gently around the smooth, dry wood of the branch. He does not grip it tightly. There is no need for force here, only patience. He lifts the heavy branch, feeling the familiar, comforting weight of it in his hand. The wood is warm to the touch, having rested near the edge of the firebed for hours, soaking in the ambient heat of the dying embers. He leans forward, just slightly, letting the heavy fur hide slide down around his waist, exposing his thick, scarred chest to the immediate, intense warmth of the fire. The air closer to the center of the cave is significantly hotter, a dry, invisible pressure that presses against his skin like a physical weight. It is a wonderful, soothing heat, the kind of deep, penetrating warmth that sinks directly into the muscles, melting away the stiff, freezing tension of the Pleistocene winter. Before him lies the firebed, a wide, shallow depression in the dusty floor of the cave. To an untrained eye, the fire might look dead. There are no tall, dancing flames. There is no roaring sound of consuming wood. There is only a quiet, uneven mound of pale grey ash and charred, blackened logs. It looks like a sleeping thing, covered in a blanket of pale, grey snow. But the man knows the truth. He knows that the fire is simply resting, holding its immense, terrible power deep beneath the surface, waiting to be woken. He slowly extends the blackened end of the pine branch toward the mound of grey ash. He moves with the careful, deliberate reverence of a creature that understands the vital, life-saving importance of the heat. Without this fire, the freezing dark outside would claim him before the sun rose. With it, he is the undisputed master of his environment and safe and warm and entirely in control. The blackened tip of the wooden poker gently touches the top of the pale grey ash. It makes a soft, muffled crunching sound, like a heavy footfall in deep, dry snow. He presses the stick downward, feeling the soft, powdery resistance of the ash give way beneath his hand. He does not strike the pile. He does not scatter the wood. He simply places the stick near the centre of the mound and begins to pull it slowly, steadily backward. As the thick branch drags through the centre of the firebed, the pale grey blanket of ash falls away, cascading down the sides of the mound in a soft, silent avalanche of dust. And beneath the ash, the true heart of the fire is suddenly, violently revealed. A blinding, intense core of deep cherry red and vibrant, glowing orange bursts into the dim light of the cave. It is a mesmerizing sight, a pocket of captured sunlight burning fiercely in the deepest dark of the Ice Age. The glowing coals are entirely devoid of flame, but they pulse with a staggering, radiant energy, a silent, vibrating heat that shimmers the air directly above them. The immediate wave of heat that washes over the man's face and chest is profound. It is a heavy, physical force, a wall of pure thermal energy that instantly dries the faint trace of dampness on his skin and sends a deep, soothing flush of blood through his heavy muscles. The sudden spike in temperature is incredibly comforting, a heavy, hypnotic warmth that makes his eyelids droop, fighting a losing battle against the overwhelming urge to sleep. As he slowly pulls the branch through the coals, the shifting, burning wood makes a beautiful, fragile sound. It is a soft, crystalline clinking, like hundreds of tiny, delicate pieces of glass tumbling over one another. The ancient wood has been baked down to pure carbon, transforming the heavy pine logs into weightless, fragile fragments of glowing red lace. They crackle and pop softly, a gentle, rhythmic whispering sound that blends perfectly with the heavy drumming of the rain outside. With the movement of the coals, a sudden, slow motion shower of tiny, brilliant orange sparks rises into the thick air of the cave. They drift upward, perfectly weightless, spinning and spiraling toward the jagged limestone ceiling like a swarm of silent, glowing fireflies. The man watches them rise, his eyes tracking their slow, lazy ascent through the dark. He watches as they gradually lose their vibrant orange color, fading slowly into a deep, dying red before blinking out of existence completely, swallowed by the shadows of the stone. The cave is now bathed in a deep and rich, saturated orange light. The walls of the sanctuary seem to glow from within, the jagged, uneven surfaces of the limestone throwing long and soft, peaceful shadows that stretch into the back of the cavern. The warm light dances softly across the man's weathered face, highlighting the deep, heavy brow, the broad, flat nose, and the quiet, infinite calm in his dark eyes. He pauses, holding the heavy wooden branch still, just letting the intense, radiant heat of the open coals wash over his injured hand. The deep cut on his palm stings for a brief moment as the dry heat tightens the skin. But then the pain begins to dull, pushed away by the overwhelming, numbing comfort of the fire. The heat is a heavy blanket pressing down on his nervous system, signaling to every muscle in his powerful body that the work of the day is done, that it is time to rest, time to heal. But the alchemy is not yet ready. The glowing red coals are too hot, too fierce, too open to the air. If he were to place the papery white birch bark directly onto the burning embers, the precious wood would simply burst into flame. It would burn away in seconds, consuming the heavy, sweet-smelling resin and leaving him with nothing but useless, bitter smoke. To create the thick, black pitch that heals the flesh, the birch bark must be baked in a place where the fire cannot reach it. It must be subjected to immense, crushing heat, but completely starved of the air it needs to burn. It must be slowly, agonizingly cooked until it bleeds its dark tar into the earth. It is a delicate, precise process, a piece of Middle Paleolithic chemistry that requires an absolute, unshakable patience. He needs the white ash. The man slowly withdraws the thick pine branch from the deep red core of the firebed. He sets the stick down gently beside him on the dusty floor, the wood clicking softly against a loose piece of limestone. He reaches forward with his thick, calloused hands, moving with an agonizing slowness, his thick fingers hovering just an inch above the blistering heat of the coals. Surrounding the glowing red heart of the firebed is a thick, deep ring of pure white ash. This is not the dark, gritty soot of the freshly burned logs. This is the fine and weightless, powdery remains of fires that burned days ago, wood that has been consumed so completely that nothing is left but the microscopic, ghostly dust of the trees. The white ash is a perfect insulator. It traps heat with a staggering efficiency, holding the thermal energy of the coals tight against the earth, preventing it from escaping into the cold air. But more importantly, the white ash is entirely devoid of oxygen. It is a dead, airless powder, the perfect medium for burying the birch bark and forcing it to sweat out its precious black resin. He cups his massive hands together, bringing them close to the outer edge of the firebed, far away from the blinding red heat of the center. He gently pushes his fingers into the mound of white ash. The texture of the ash is incredible. It is softer than the finest sand, lighter than the driest dust. It feels like slipping his hands into a pool of warm, weightless water. The ash gives way instantly beneath his touch, a silent, frictionless yielding that feels deeply satisfying against his rough skin. He slowly scoops a large, double handful of the powdery white dust, lifting it carefully from the edge of the firebed. The ash is delightfully warm, holding a gentle, residual heat that seeps slowly into the calloused skin of his palms, soothing the dull ache of the deep cut. He moves his cupped hands toward the center of the glowing red coals, right beside the deepest, hottest part of the fire. With a slow, deliberate twist of his thick wrists, he allows the fine white powder to spill out from between his fingers. The ash falls in a slow, silent curtain, a waterfall of pale white dust cascading down over the burning red embers. As the powder hits the intense heat of the coals, there is no sound, no smoke, no sudden flare of flame. The white ash simply covers the red light, burying the fierce, glowing carbon beneath a soft, pale blanket. He repeats the motion, reaching back to the outer edge of the firebed, scooping another massive handful of the warm, weightless powder, and gently pouring it over the center. He does this again and again, his movements perfectly steady, perfectly rhythmic, completely locked into the slow, hypnotic tempo of his own breathing. Scoop, lift, pour, return. The repetition of the motion is deeply mesmerizing, a quiet, ancient meditation performed in the heart of a frozen world. He is completely lost in the task, his mind entirely emptied of thought, entirely focused on the soft, tactile sensation of the warm ash slipping through his fingers, and the fading, suffocating red light of the coals below. Slowly and carefully, he begins to build a thick, perfectly level bed of white ash directly next to the hottest part of the embers. He uses the flat side of his heavy hand to smooth the surface of the powder, pressing it down gently, compacting the fine dust until it forms a perfectly flat, perfectly smooth circular plateau. The heat radiating from the ash bed is immense, a steady, invisible pillar of thermal energy rising into the dark of the cave. But the surface of the powder is entirely calm. There is no red light visible here, no glowing carbon, no shifting logs. Just a flat, pristine circle of pale white dust, quietly baking from the unimaginable heat trapped directly beneath it. He pauses, his hand hovering just an inch above the smoothed surface of the ash. He closes his eyes, letting his heightened senses evaluate the preparation. He does not need to see the heat to understand it. He can feel the exact temperature of the air pressing against the thick hairs on the back of his hand. He can smell the distinct, sharp absence of burning wood, replaced by the clean and dry, sterile scent of the superheated dust. It is perfect. The heat is deep and steady and perfectly insulated. The airless chamber is ready. He opens his eyes, letting out a long, slow breath that disturbs the very top layer of the white ash, sending a tiny, invisible cloud of dust drifting into the warm air. He pulls his hands back, letting them rest once again on his heavy thighs. The thick fur of the cave bear hides soft and reassuring against his skin. Outside the mouth of the cave, the Pleistocene rain continues to fall in massive, freezing sheets, the sound a constant, heavy drumming against the ancient stone. The wind wails its long, mournful cry, tearing at the dark pine forest, stripping the dead leaves and freezing the damp earth solid. But inside the sanctuary, the air is thick and dry and perfectly still. The deep, heavy quiet of the cave settles back over the man like a heavy, weighted blanket. The glowing red coals pulse softly in the dark, casting their gentle, rhythmic orange light against the jagged walls. The perfectly smooth, perfectly level bed of white ash sits waiting, holding its immense, invisible heat, ready to receive the medicine of the forest. The man turns his heavy head, his dark eyes looking slowly toward the shadows at the back of the cave, where the papery white rolls of dry birch bark wait in the dark. The preparation of the earth is complete. The alchemy is about to begin. The deep, heavy shadows at the very back of the limestone cavern remain, untouched by the soft orange light of the dying fire. In this ancient space, the light only travels as far as it needs to, leaving the furthest reaches of the stone hollow cloaked in a cool, undisturbed darkness. It is a quiet, restful dark, the kind of absolute blackness that soothes the eyes and calms the deeply exhausted mind. The Neanderthal turns his massive head slowly away from the hypnotic, pulsing red core of the firebird, tearing his gaze from the mesmerizing heat. His neck is thick and powerfully muscled, accustomed to supporting the heavy, constant weight of survival. But right now, every movement is soft and fluid, and completely unhurried. He lets his eyes adjust to the deep shadows near the rear wall of his sanctuary, embracing the sudden, cooling absence of light. Resting quietly in the dust just at the edge of the deepest shadows is a carefully gathered pile of pristine wood. It is the raw material of his ancient alchemy, a stack of papery, stark white bark harvested from the silent birch trees that stand tall in the freezing valleys below. The bark glows with a faint, ghostly luminescence in the dim cavern, standing out in stark contrast against the dark, soot-stained limestone walls. He had gathered this precious material hours ago, moving through the silent, frozen woods with the practiced, invisible grace of a master hunter. He had known the storm was coming long before the first drop of water fell, reading the heavy, metallic scent of the shifting air and the sudden, breathless quiet of the deep woods. He knew that the birch bark had to be perfectly dry, entirely untouched by the coming deluge, if it was to yield its thick, healing resin. Before he reaches for the white wood, he pauses, letting his heavy hands rest on his knees, his broad chest rising and falling in a deep, steady rhythm. He tilts his head slightly toward the jagged mouth of the cave, listening intently to the massive, terrifying power of the world outside. The violent contrast between out there and in here is the deepest, most profound source of his comfort. Beyond the invisible boundary of his radiant fire, the heavy, freezing sheet of grey water from the hook of the evening continues to hammer against the earth. The sheer volume of the Pleistocene rain is staggering, an endless, crushing ocean falling from the black sky, threatening to drown the ancient pine forest entirely. The massive, ancient trees bend and groan under the immense weight of the freezing water, their thick branches thrashing wildly in the bitter, howling wind. Out there, the world is chaotic and lethal, and bitterly, unspeakably cold. Every heavy drop of rain carries the biting chill of the surrounding ice fields, a freezing numbness that would strip the heat from a man's bones in a matter of minutes. The wind screams through the narrow stone valleys, a relentless, punishing force that seeks out every crack, every crevice, every living thing trying to hide in the dark. But inside the cave, the air remains perfectly, wonderfully still. The freezing wind is broken completely by the massive bulk of the limestone cliff, shattering against the ancient rock and scattering harmlessly into the dark. The violent, wailing sounds of the storm are muffled by the thick stone walls, reduced to a heavy, hypnotic drone that merely serves to deepen the absolute silence of the interior. The heavy, freezing sheet of grey water cannot touch him. The bitter, cutting wind cannot reach him. He is entirely enveloped in a cocoon of dry, radiant heat, wrapped securely in the impossibly soft, dense fur of the heavy cave bear hide. The deep, physical knowledge of his own absolute safety washes over his massive frame, relaxing the powerful muscles of his back, his shoulders, his jaw. He reaches out his left arm, extending his thick, soot-stained fingers toward the pale stack of white birch bark resting in the cool dust. His movements are incredibly slow, heavy with the dragging weight of total physical relaxation, completely devoid of urgency or haste. His broad hand hovers over the pile for a long, quiet moment, feeling the slight drop in temperature as he moves away from the direct, invisible pillar of the fire's heat. His thick fingers brush gently against the topmost layer of the papery white bark, making a soft and dry, whispering sound in the quiet cavern. It is a beautiful, fragile sound, like the dry rustling of autumn leaves settling onto the hard earth, a stark, crisp contrast to the heavy, wet drumming of the endless rain outside. The sound alone is deeply satisfying, confirming exactly what he already knew: the bark is perfectly, flawlessly dry. He slides his collosed fingertips over the outer surface of the birch bark, absorbing the complex, ancient textures of the tree. The outside of the bark is chalky and rough, and slightly powdery to the touch, scarred by years of growing in the harsh, unforgiving winds of the Pleistocene environment. It feels like touching thin, hardened leather that has been baked in the sun and frozen in the deep winter, resilient and tough, yet paper-thin. With a slow, gentle pressure, he grips the edges of the top few layers of bark and lifts them away from the pile. The dry wood separates with a soft, delicate tearing sound, a microscopic fracturing of ancient plant fibers that echoes quietly against the limestone walls. He brings the heavy handful of white bark closer to his body, pulling it out of the cool shadows and into the soft, warm orange glow of the dying fire. In the gentle light, the true nature of the birch bark is revealed. While the outer layer is a stark, powdery white, the inner curve of the bark is entirely different, a rich and warm, golden brown surface that catches the firelight beautifully. This inner layer is smooth, almost waxy to the touch, holding the microscopic, dormant droplets of raw, amber sap sealed tight within its dense, fibrous structure. He brings the stack of bark up toward his face, lowering his heavy brow to inhale the deep, complex scent of the dry wood. The smell is incredibly rich, a fragrant, earthy mixture of dry winter air, sweet, dormant sap, and the clean, sharp scent of the deep pine forest. It blends perfectly with the heavy, lingering aroma of the old wood smoke that coats the walls of the cave, creating a deep, intoxicating perfume that fills his lungs and calms his mind. He lowers his hands to his lap, resting the crisp white bark on the heavy, dark fur of the cave bear hide covering his crossed legs. He is ready to begin the delicate, physical work of the Middle Paleolithic alchemy, the slow, methodical preparation of the wood before it is given over to the absolute heat of the white ash. He takes the largest, thickest piece of birch bark from the small pile, holding it gently between the thick, powerful fingers of both hands. He must roll the bark into a tight, dense cylinder, packing the wood as closely together as possible so that the dark, healing resin will pool and gather when the intense heat begins to crush it. It is a task that requires a heavy, sustained pressure, but also a careful, practiced gentleness, so the brittle wood does not shatter into useless fragments. He presses his thumbs against the smooth, golden brown inner surface of the bark, applying a slow and steady, even pressure along the center line. The dry wood resists for a long moment, stiff and rigid from its time in the freezing air, refusing to bend to the will of his heavy hands. But he does not force it. He does not rush. He simply maintains the heavy, unyielding pressure, letting the radiant warmth of the nearby coals begin to soften the ancient fibers. Slowly, with a soft, drawn-out creaking sound, the thick piece of birch bark begins to yield, curving gently under the immense strength of his broad thumbs. The crisp, white outer layer of the wood splinters slightly along the bend, a microscopic web of tiny cracks appearing on the chalky surface. He rolls the edge of the bark inward, folding it over itself, beginning the slow, deliberate process of creating a tight, dense core of dry wood. As his massive right hand grips the curling bark tightly, the deep, stinging cut from the slipped flint blade presses hard against the rough, chalky surface of the wood. A sudden, sharp spike of pain flares across his collapsed palm, a hot, throbbing H that radiates deep into the heavy muscles of his forearm. The pain is bright and immediate, cutting through the heavy lethargy of the warm cave for a brief, fleeting second. He does not flinch. He does not release his grip on the rolled bark. He simply acknowledges the sharp sting, allowing it to exist without fighting it, his breathing remaining perfectly slow and deep and unbroken. The sudden flare of pain is merely a quiet reminder of why he is sitting in the dust, a physical validation of the necessity of the dark, sweet-smelling medicine he is preparing to summon. He continues to roll the bark, his thick fingers moving with a heavy, methodical rhythm, folding the brittle wood tighter and tighter until it forms a dense, solid cylinder in his hands. He takes another piece of the papery white bark from his lap, wrapping it carefully around the tight central core, adding layer after layer of dry wood to the heavy bundle. The sound of the bark bending and cracking is a constant, rhythmic crunching in the quiet space, a deeply tactile, deeply satisfying noise. It sounds like footsteps in perfectly dry, newly fallen snow, a soft, crushing friction that echoes pleasantly in the warm, enclosed sanctuary. With every layer he adds, the cylinder of birch bark grows thicker and heavier and more dense, packing a massive amount of potential resin into a very small, tightly bound space. When the roll of wood is as thick as his heavy wrist, he stops, holding the tight cylinder firmly in his massive, soot-stained hands. He squeezes the bundle tightly, feeling the dense, unyielding strength of the packed fibers, entirely satisfied with the dense weight of his preparation. It is perfectly constructed, a tightly wound knot of ancient wood ready to be sacrificed to the overwhelming heat of the firebird. He shifts his heavy body forward again, moving away from the cool, comforting shadows at the back of the cave, and leaning over the radiant, shifting warmth of the glowing coals. The heavy cave bear hide slides down his broad back, exposing his thick shoulders and deeply scarred chest to the immense, invisible pillar of thermal energy rising from the dusty floor. The intense, dry heat washes over his skin like a heavy wave, a profound, physical pressure that instantly soothes the sharp sting in his injured palm. The air here is so hot it feels almost solid, a thick, shimmering curtain of pure warmth that forces his heavy eyelids to droop low over his dark eyes. He breathes in the superheated air slowly, letting it fill his massive chest, a deep, grounding breath that anchors his heavy body firmly to the ancient stone beneath him. Directly in front of him, next to the blinding, cherry-red core of the dying embers, sits the perfectly smooth, perfectly level plateau of pure white ash. It looks exactly as he left it, a pristine, undisturbed circle of pale, weightless dust, completely silent, yet holding an unimaginable reservoir of trapped, airless heat. This is the crucible. This is where the rough, dry wood of the forest will be transformed into the thick and black, life-saving tar. He moves his hands directly over the center of the smooth ash bed, holding the tight cylinder of white birch bark horizontally above the superheated dust. The invisible heat radiating upward is staggering, baking the skin of his forearms and causing the microscopic droplets of dormant sap inside the rolled wood to immediately begin to sweat. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of hot pine and sweet resin drifts into the air, the very first, subtle promise of the medicine to come. With a slow, deliberate downward motion, he presses the heavy cylinder of tightly rolled birch bark directly into the exact center of the pristine white ash. The incredibly fine, powdery dust offers absolutely zero resistance to his heavy hands, yielding instantly and silently beneath the weight of the dense wood. The pale ash parts like warm water, swallowing the bottom half of the thick white cylinder in a perfectly smooth, frictionless embrace. He pushes deeper, his thick fingers sinking into the superheated dust alongside the wood, feeling the immense, crushing heat trapped just beneath the surface. The temperature inside the ash is astonishing, a deep, baking fire that is completely devoid of oxygen, entirely incapable of creating a spark, yet hot enough to instantly melt the ancient resins trapped within the bark. The tight roll of birch bark sinks completely below the level surface of the ash, disappearing entirely into the pale, weightless powder. He withdraws his heavy fingers slowly, leaving a deep, dark hollow in the center of the perfectly smooth plateau. The wood is now fully submerged in the deep, agonizing heat, sitting blindly in the dark, entirely cut off from the cool, circulating air of the open cavern. But the airless chamber is not yet fully sealed. The top of the rolled wood is still exposed to the oxygen in the cave, and if a single, stray spark from the nearby coals were to land upon it, the entire bundle would instantly ignite. He cannot allow the wood to burn. The alchemy requires complete suffocation, an environment of total, crushing heat and absolute, unbroken darkness. He reaches his massive hands to the outer edges of the ash bed, his thick fingers gently scooping the loose, powdery white dust that forms the perimeter of the plateau. The ash is delightfully warm against his rough skin, a soft, silken texture that feels deeply comforting after the sharp, stinging pain of the slipped flint blade. He lifts the weightless powder slowly, carrying it carefully toward the open hollow in the center of the mound. With a soft, fluid twist of his heavy wrists, he pours the pale white ash directly over the top of the exposed birch bark, filling the hollow completely. The fine dust cascades down in a silent, frictionless waterfall, settling heavily over the dense wood, burying it entirely beneath a thick, impenetrable blanket of superheated powder. He repeats the motion again and again, scooping the warm ash and pouring it gently and methodically until the mound is perfectly level once more. He uses the flat, calloused palm of his uninjured hand to gently smooth the surface of the ash, pressing the incredibly fine powder down with a slow, heavy pressure. He compacts the dust tightly over the buried wood, entirely eliminating any tiny pockets of air, sealing the tightly rolled birch bark inside a perfect, suffocating tomb of unimaginable heat. The preparation is now entirely complete. The papery white bark of the silent forest has been carefully harvested, tightly rolled, and perfectly buried in the deep, airless dark of the Middle Paleolithic fired. The glowing red coals pulse softly beside the smoothed mound of ash, feeding their immense, invisible thermal energy directly into the buried wood, beginning the slow, agonizing process of extraction. The man slowly pulls his heavy hands back from the blinding heat of the fire, letting his broad shoulders slump down in a posture of total, profound relaxation. He pulls the thick, dense cave, bare hide back up over his scarred chest, wrapping the comforting warmth of the heavy fur tightly around his massive frame. He settles his immense weight fully into the soft, dusty floor of the cavern, rooting his body entirely to the solid, unmoving stone of the ancient earth. He does not need to do anything more. There is no further action required, no force to apply, no heavy labour left to perform in the quiet sanctuary of his limestone cave. The deep, stinging cut on his palm pulses softly, a dull, fading ache that he knows will soon be washed away completely by the thick, sweet-smelling black pitch currently bleeding from the crushed wood. All that is left for him to do now is to simply exist. To sit quietly in the absolute, unquestionable safety of the dry cavern, completely protected from the violent, freezing wind and the heavy, endless drumming of the Pleistocene rain. To let his slow, rhythmic breathing match the gentle, fading pulse of the glowing, red embers. To let his heavy, exhausted muscles completely release their iron tension. The heavy, silent waiting begins. The profound, mesmerizing alchemy of the Middle Paleolithic fire is finally underway. Time in the Middle Paleolithic does not move with the rigid, frantic pace of the modern world. Here, in the deep, undisturbed shadows of the limestone cave, time is a heavy, slow-moving river that barely seems to flow at all. It is a soft, quiet measurement, tracked only by the steady, unbroken rhythm of a man's breathing and the gradual, fading glow of the red embers. The Neanderthal sits perfectly still in the dry dust, his massive, powerful frame completely relaxed under the heavy drape of the thick cave bear hide. He has successfully buried the papery white wood deep within the crushing, airless heat of the white ash, sealing the ancient crucible. Now, there is absolutely nothing left to do but wait for the unseen alchemy to run its course. He accepts this prolonged waiting without a single trace of impatience or restless energy. In his world, waiting is not a burden, it is a profound, necessary resting period, a precious opportunity to let the deep exhaustion of survival melt away into the earth. He embraces the total stillness of the cavern, letting his heavy shoulders drop slightly lower as the deep, ambient warmth of the fire completely envelops him. The heavy, dark fur of the animal hide rests solidly against the scarred, weathered skin of his broad back. The natural insulation of the thick pelt traps the radiant heat of the glowing coals directly against his body, creating a deeply comforting, personal cocoon of warmth. The contrast between this heavy, physical heat and the freezing, bitter memory of the long hunt is a source of immense, quiet joy. He does not need to look at the fire to know exactly what it is doing. He can feel the heavy, invisible wave of thermal energy pressing against the rough skin of his face and his bare chest. It is a dry, pure heat, completely free of the stinging, bitter smoke that comes from burning fresh, damp wood. The ancient pine logs have been reduced to pure, glowing carbon, offering only a clean and silent and incredibly powerful warmth. He slowly lowers his heavy chin, letting it rest gently against the soft, thick edge of the fur hide gathered around his collarbone. The movement is slow and lethargic, the deliberate shifting of a creature that has surrendered completely to the overwhelming safety of his sanctuary. He allows his heavy eyelids to droop low, half closing his dark eyes as he stares blankly into the soft, shifting orange light of the fired. Outside the mouth of the cave, the Pleistocene rain continues its violent, endless assault upon the dark, ancient pine forest. The massive, freezing storm shows absolutely no signs of slowing down, dumping thousands of gallons of icy water onto the frozen, rocky landscape. It is a deluge of epic proportions, a heavy, crushing sheet of grey water that obscures the distant mountains and drowns the deep valleys. But as the man listens from the absolute dry safety of his cavern, the violent noise of the storm begins to subtly change its character. Earlier, the rain had been a chaotic, deafening roar, a terrifying wall of sound driven by the vicious, howling wind tearing through the riverbed. Now, as the heavy night deepens and the cold air settles firmly over the earth, the wind begins to lose its sharp, aggressive edge. The howling gusts slowly fade into a long and low, continuous moan that weaves gently through the thick trunks of the ancient trees. Without the violently whipping wind to tear the rain sideways, the water begins to fall in a massive and straight, unbroken vertical sheet. The chaotic, crashing sound of the storm slowly organizes itself into a heavy and rhythmic, hypnotic drumming that pounds steadily against the jagged limestone cliff above. This new sound is deeply mesmerizing, a constant, rolling wave of heavy acoustic pressure that fills the vast, empty space of the forest. The millions of freezing raindrops shatter against the solid rock of the cliff face, creating a soft, continuous hiss of breaking water that blends perfectly with the low rumble of the downpour. It is a natural, ancient lullaby, a heavy blanket of white noise that washes completely over the mind, scrubbing away all complex thought. Inside the deep acoustic chamber of the cave, the sound of the rain is heavily muffled, softened by the thick, sound-absorbing dust and the uneven rock walls. The harsh, biting frequencies of the storm are filtered out entirely, leaving only a deep, resonant hum that vibrates softly through the solid floor of the cavern. The man can actually feel the distant, heavy impacts of the rain resonating faintly through the thick bones of his crossed legs. He closes his eyes completely, shutting out the soft, swaying orange light of the dying coals. The sudden, absolute darkness behind his eyelids is cool and restful, a deep, empty void that offers perfect visual silence. Deprived of sight, his other senses immediately begin to expand, reaching out slowly into the heavy, warm air of the cave to monitor his safe, sheltered environment. The acoustic landscape of his sanctuary is a masterpiece of quiet, comforting isolation. Beneath the heavy, distant drone of the Pleistocene rain, he can hear the incredibly delicate, microscopic sounds of the fire shifting directly in front of him. The glowing red carbon cracks and pops with a soft, crystalline fragility, sounding like tiny, muffled bells chiming deep within a pocket of dry, warm earth. Every time a fragile piece of glowing wood collapses under its own weight, a tiny, silent shower of orange sparks dances briefly in the dark before vanishing. He cannot see them now, but he can hear the soft, whispering sigh the ash makes as the logs settle deeper into the floor of the cavern. It is the sound of time passing, of heat slowly transferring from the ancient wood into the cold, uncaring stone of the earth. His own breathing becomes the loudest, most dominant sound within his immediate perception. He draws the warm, dry air deeply through his broad nose, the slow inhalation making a soft, rushing sound that fills the back of his throat. He holds the heavy, oxygen-rich air in his massive lungs for a long, quiet moment, feeling the deep, internal stretch of his powerful chest muscles expanding under the fur. Then, he releases the breath in a long, incredibly slow, controlled exhalation that pushes through his slightly parted lips with a gentle, hushing sound, The warm air washes over the very edge of the white ash bed, completely invisible, yet carrying the heavy, physical manifestation of his profound relaxation. With every long, slow breath he takes, his resting heart rate drops just a little bit further, sinking down into a deep, meditative rhythm. As his heart rate slows, the heavy, thick blood pumping through his powerful veins begins to move with a sluggish, peaceful grace. The deep, stinging cut running across the calloused palm of his right hand slowly begins to lose its sharp, demanding voice. The bright, immediate flash of pain from the slipped flint blade fades down into a dull and distant, and entirely manageable throb. The extreme, ambient heat radiating from the fired acts as a heavy, natural narcotic on his exhausted nervous system. It penetrates deep through his thick, weather-beaten skin, soaking past the dense layers of muscle, and warming the very marrow of his heavy bones. The stiff, freezing tension that had gripped his joints during the long, brutal hours of the wet hunt finally, completely uncoils. His heavy hands rest perfectly still upon his knees, the thick, soot-stained fingers completely devoid of the urge to grasp, to build, or to fight. His massive shoulders, usually hunched tightly against the biting wind of the Ice Age, drop heavily, perfectly relaxed beneath the warm weight of the cave bear hide. He feels incredibly heavy, as if gravity itself has increased inside the cave, pulling his dense body softly but firmly down into the dry, dusty floor. Just a few feet away, completely hidden beneath the perfectly smooth, pale plateau of the white ash, the profound transformation is quietly taking place. The thick, tight cylinder of papery birch bark is entirely entombed in an environment of unimaginable, suffocating heat. There is absolutely no oxygen available to ignite the ancient wood, no air to spark the dormant sap into a bright, consuming flame. Instead, the immense thermal energy radiating from the adjacent red coals simply crushes the buried wood, breaking down its complex, fibrous structure in the dark. The extreme heat forces the microscopic droplets of sweet, dormant resin sealed tight within the golden-brown inner layer of the bark to desperately seek an escape. Unable to burn, the sap begins to violently sweat from the crushed wood, gathering into thick, heavy beads of dark liquid. Deep within the silent, airless tomb of the white ash, the wood is slowly, agonizingly bleeding out its dark, precious secret. The thick, sticky beads of boiling sap slide down the tightly rolled layers of the birch bark, pooling together to form a rich and dense, heavy black tar. It is the purest essence of the ancient tree, a concentrated, flawless medicine born directly from the brutal pressure of the Middle Paleolithic fire. For a long, quiet time, there is no external evidence that this miraculous, invisible alchemy is happening at all. The surface of the pale white ash remains perfectly smooth, completely undisturbed, looking exactly like a dead, forgotten mound of cold dust. The man simply sits with his eyes closed, his breathing matching the slow, heavy drum beat of the endless rain outside, existing entirely in the peaceful, suspended space of the wait. But then, very slowly, the atmosphere inside the enclosed cavern begins to undergo a profound and beautiful shift. It starts as a tiny, almost imperceptible ghost of a scent, a microscopic alteration in the chemical makeup of the hot, dry air. It is so faint at first that the man does not consciously register it, his deeply relaxed mind floating somewhere between waking and the heavy pull of sleep. The scent is carried on the invisible thermal currents rising from the superheated dust. drifting upward toward the jagged, shadowy ceiling of the cave. It mixes with the deep, earthy smell of the ancient limestone and the lingering, familiar aroma of the old pine wood smoke. But as the minutes slowly stretch on and the invisible heat continues to crush the buried wood, the new scent begins to gather a rich, undeniable strength. The man takes another long and deep, rhythmic breath, pulling the warm air slowly into his broad chest. This time, the new scent catches directly in his senses, a sudden, beautiful note of sweetness that cuts smoothly through the dry, heavy atmosphere. It is the sharp, incredibly rich aroma of hot, melting pine resin, mingled with the uniquely deep, earthy sweetness of boiling birch sap. He does not open his eyes, but a profound, physical wave of relief washes completely over his heavy body. He recognizes the scent instantly, a deep, instinctual knowledge passed down through the blood of countless generations who have survived the bitter ice. The arrival of the sweet, heavy smell means the alchemy has worked. The white ash has held its total, suffocating seal, and the wood is successfully surrendering its dark, healing pitch. The scent grows thicker and heavier, and more intoxicating with every passing minute, slowly replacing the dry smell of the dust with a rich, fragrant perfume. It is a wildly complex aroma, smelling simultaneously of deep, ancient forests and dark, damp earth, and an almost honey-like, medicinal sweetness. It fills the entire cavern, a heavy, invisible cloud of pure olfactory comfort that settles gently over the man's resting form. The smell of the melting birch resin is deeply hypnotic, a natural, soothing incense that acts directly upon the deepest, oldest parts of his brain. It signals absolute safety. It signals that the environment has been successfully mastered, that the necessary tools for survival and healing have been flawlessly prepared. It tells his exhausted nervous system that there are no predators, no freezing winds, and no dangers left to fight. He inhales the sweet, heavy air deeply, letting the rich scent fill him completely, savoring the thick, aromatic warmth. The aroma is so incredibly dense now that it almost feels tactile, a heavy, velvety texture that coats the back of his throat and settles warmly into his chest. It completely overpowers the faint, metallic scent of the fresh rain blowing in from the mouth of the cavern, dominating the small, enclosed space entirely. Below the surface of the pale white ash, the process is reaching its natural, dark conclusion. The tightly rolled cylinder of papery white bark has been baked completely black, reduced to a fragile, carbonized husk of its former shape. Every single drop of the thick and heavy, amber-colored sap has been forcefully squeezed from the broken fibers, pooling thickly at the bottom of the airless chamber. The intense, baking heat has boiled the raw sap down, cooking away all the thin, watery moisture and leaving behind only the most concentrated, viscous elements. The resulting substance is a pure, flawless pool of dark birch bark pitch, a thick and sticky, incredibly powerful black tar that carries the deep, natural antibacterial properties of the ancient forest. It bubbles very slowly in the dark, a thick and heavy, silent boiling beneath the crushing weight of the ash. The man can smell the subtle shift in the aroma, the transition from the sharp, bright scent of melting sap to the deeper and heavier, slightly bitter smell of fully cooked pitch. The transformation is entirely complete. The deep, unseen forces of the earth and the fire have finished their slow, deliberate work, creating the medicine exactly as they have done for thousands of freezing winters before. He allows himself to remain in his state of deep sensory relaxation for just a few moments longer, thoroughly enjoying the heavy, sweet-smelling air. He listens to the rhythmic, hypnotic drumming of the heavy Pleistocene rain outside, feeling the profound contrast between the chaotic, freezing wet world and his perfect and dry, fragrant sanctuary. The dull ache in his right hand is now barely a whisper, a distant memory almost entirely erased by the overwhelming comfort of the radiant heat. Slowly, with an agonizing lack of urgency, he allows his heavy eyelids to flutter open. The soft, shifting orange light of the dying coals gently floods back into his vision, painting the jagged limestone walls in deep and peaceful, swaying shadows. The perfectly smooth, pale plateau of the white ash remains, entirely undisturbed right in front of him, silently hiding the dark, healing treasure pooled within its superheated depths. He takes one final, incredibly deep breath of the sweet and rich, resin-filled air, letting the intoxicating aroma center his mind and focus his gentle, sluggish thoughts. The long, heavy period of waiting is finally over. The time has come to slowly break the seal of the white ash, to retrieve the thick, black medicine from the dark, and to bring the quiet, ancient work of the night to its healing conclusion. The heavy, intoxicating perfume of the hot birch resin has completely saturated the stagnant air of the limestone cavern, wrapping the man in a thick, invisible blanket of absolute serenity. The profound, physical stillness that has gripped his massive frame for the last hour slowly begins to loosen, releasing his dense muscles from their deep, lethargic trance. He does not jolt awake or move with any sudden, jarring energy, for the Middle Paleolithic night demands nothing but endless, unhurried patience. He slowly blinks his dark eyes, clearing the heavy, drowsy film of near sleep, letting the soft, swaying orange light of the dying firebid wash back into his vision. The glowing red coals have burned down significantly, losing their blinding, vibrant ferocity and settling into a deep, bruised cherry red color. They pulse with a quiet, fading rhythm, emitting a gentle, steady radiant heat that feels like a soft physical weight pressing against his scarred chest. Outside the sanctuary, the heavy, freezing sheet of grey water continues its endless, hypnotic assault upon the dark pine forest. The Pleistocene rain has not relented for a single moment, a massive crushing downpour that drums relentlessly against the jagged stone of the cliff face above. The sound is a constant, rolling wave of deep white noise, a heavy, acoustic pressure that filters out the chaotic, terrifying world and leaves only a profound, vibrating hum in the dusty floor. He takes a long, slow breath, pulling the incredibly rich, sweet-smelling air deep into his broad chest, feeling the hot, resinous vapor coat the back of his throat. The sharp, bright scent of melting pine and the heavy, earthy sweetness of the boiling birch sap signal that the invisible alchemy is entirely complete. The papery white wood has surrendered its dark, healing secret to the crushing, airless heat of the white ash, and it is finally time to break the seal. With a slow and fluid, almost completely effortless grace, the Neanderthal shifts his heavy weight, moving his massive shoulders forward. The thick, dense cave bear hide drapes over his broad back, the long fur whispering softly against the dry limestone wall as he leans closer to the fire. The immediate wave of intense, dry heat radiating from the superheated dust washes over his weathered face, a deep, baking warmth that causes his thick eyelids to narrow comfortably. He does not reach directly into the pristine, pale mound of the white ash with his bare hands. He knows the immense, invisible thermal energy trapped just beneath the perfectly smooth surface of the powder is fierce enough to instantly blister his calloused skin. The white ash is a flawless insulator, a deadly trap of pure, airless heat that must be opened with the careful, practiced reverence of a creature who truly respects the fire. Instead, his heavy, soot-stained fingers reach out slowly to his left, brushing against the dusty, uneven floor of the cavern until he finds what he is looking for. Resting in the cool shadows is a long, flat piece of fire-hardened wood, an ancient, primitive spatula carved from the dense heartwood of a fallen oak. The tool is incredibly smooth, polished by years of heavy use, entirely blackened and charred at one end from countless encounters with the glowing coals. He grips the thick wooden handle loosely, feeling the familiar, comforting weight of the solid oak resting perfectly within the curve of his massive palm. The deep, stinging cut on his right hand pulses with a dull, distant ache as he wraps his thick fingers around the wood, but the pain is faint, entirely overshadowed by the heavy, narcotic effect of the warm resin in the air. He lifts the heavy tool with a slow, deliberate strength, bringing the charred, flattened end to hover just above the perfect, undisturbed plateau of the white ash. He pauses for a long, quiet moment, his heavy breathing matching the slow, rhythmic hissing of the dying embers and the distant, heavy drumming of the endless rain. He watches the soft orange light flicker across the pale, weightless dust, knowing that just an inch below the surface, the dark, bubbling medicine is waiting in the dark. With a slow, steady exhalation, he gently lowers the flat edge of the blackened oak into the very top layer of the superheated powder. The incredibly fine, powdery dust offers absolutely zero resistance to the heavy wooden tool, parting instantly and silently beneath the gentle pressure. He does not dig deep into the mound. Instead, he uses a soft, sweeping motion, dragging the flat edge of the oak across the top of the plateau, slowly peeling away the heavy blanket of suffocating heat. The white ash cascades down the sides of the mound in a slow, silent waterfall, a pale, frictionless avalanche of completely dead, weightless powder. As the first thick layer of the ash is swept away, a sudden, intense wave of trapped heat violently escapes from the breached tomb. It rushes upward in a shimmering, invisible column of pure thermal energy, carrying with it an incredibly concentrated, almost intoxicating blast of the sweet, heavy birch aroma. The smell is overwhelmingly rich, a deep, bitter, sweet fragrance of perfectly cooked pitch that fills the small, enclosed space of the cave with a sudden, beautiful intensity. He breathes the heavy vapor in slowly, his broad nose flaring slightly as he absorbs the pure, unadulterated essence of the ancient forest. It is the smell of survival, the smell of healing, a scent that speaks directly to the oldest, most instinctual parts of his deeply relaxed brain. He continues to sweep the flat wooden tool back and forth with a mesmerizing, metronomic rhythm, carefully pulling the superheated dust away from the center of the buried chamber. With each slow, methodical sweep of the blackened oak, the pale blanket of ash grows thinner, until the dark, buried secret of the firebird finally begins to reveal itself. Beneath the weightless white powder, the tight cylinder of papery birch bark has undergone a complete, devastating physical transformation. The pristine, chalky white wood is entirely gone, replaced by a fragile, completely blackened, carbonized husk of its former shape. The intense, airless heat of the crucible has baked the heavy bundle of bark down to its absolute molecular core, destroying the tough, fibrous structure entirely. What remains is a brittle, incredibly delicate shell of pure black charcoal, maintaining the shape of the tightly rolled cylinder, but holding none of its original unyielding strength. The charred wood is covered in a fine layer of the white ash, making it look like a strange, dark fossil buried deep within the pale earth. He uses the very tip of the heavy oak tool to gently tap the top of the carbonized husk, applying only the slightest fraction of his massive strength. The delicate, blackened shell instantly crumbles, shattering into 100 tiny, weightless pieces of fragile charcoal with a soft and dry, crackling sound. The shattered fragments fall away, collapsing inward and completely exposing the small, shallow depression in the dusty floor where the true alchemy has taken place. Sitting in the very bottom of the small, clay-lined hollow is a thick, pooling puddle of pure, completely black birch bark pitch. It is a stunning, mesmerizing sight in the dim light of the cavern, a dark, glossy mirror that perfectly reflects the soft, swaying orange glow of the dying coals. The heavy, sticky tar is incredibly dense, a concentrated, viscous liquid born directly from the violent, crushing pressure of the Middle Paleolithic fire. Because it has just been exposed to the circulating air of the cave, the thick black pitch is still completely superheated, holding an unimaginable temperature within its dark, glossy depths. Very slowly, with an agonizingly heavy, sluggish rhythm, the thick tar bubbles. A large, perfectly smooth dome of the black liquid slowly rises from the center of the pool, swelling heavily before softly, silently popping, releasing another thick cloud of the rich, sweet-smelling vapor. The man watches the slow, heavy bubbling of the pitch with a profound, quiet satisfaction, his dark eyes reflecting the mesmerizing, shifting light of the dark medicine. The tar is perfectly formed, entirely devoid of the watery, thin sap that comes from a rushed or poorly insulated fire. It is thick and heavy, and completely black, holding the deep and powerful antibacterial properties of the white ash and the ancient pine resin in a flawless, sticky suspension. The radiant heat pouring off the open pool of pitch is staggering, a sharp, biting warmth that finally forces him to pull his heavy, soot-stained face slightly back from the edge of the hollow. He cannot touch the medicine, yet the boiling tar would instantly sear the flesh from his massive fingers, adding a horrific new wound to the deep, stinging cut already pulsing on his palm. The pitch must be given time to calm, to slowly lose its violent, boiling heat to the cooler, ambient air of the cavern. He moves the heavy oak tool, again using the flat edge to carefully clear a wider circle in the pale white ash, pushing the superheated dust completely away from the small clay-lined depression. He wants the cooler, heavier air resting near the dusty floor of the cave to flow over the open pool of tar, gently pulling the extreme thermal energy out of the dark, sticky liquid. His movements are incredibly precise, the slow, heavy grace of a massive creature performing a microscopic, delicate task. With the ash completely cleared, the small, hardened clay cup holding the black pitch is fully exposed, sitting like a dark, precious jewel in the center of the pale, dusty floor. He uses the charred end of the oak tool to gently hook the edge of the small clay vessel, preparing to drag it away from the immense, radiant heat of the glowing red coals. He pulls the heavy stick backward with a smooth, continuous motion, sliding the clay pot across the flat limestone earth. The hardened clay makes a soft, scraping sound against the dry stone, a gentle, rhythmic grinding that blends perfectly with the constant, heavy drumming of the Pleistocene rain outside. He pulls the small vessel out of the superheated zone, moving it toward the cooler, shadowy edge of the cavern, where the deep chill of the rock has not been fully defeated by the fire. He stops pulling, leaving the pot resting safely in the dim, soft light, far away from the blinding heat of the embers. He sets the heavy wooden tool down on the floor beside him, his thick, calloused fingers releasing the smooth oak handle with a soft, lethargic slowness. He leans his massive body backward, settling his broad, scarred shoulders against the rough, uneven surface of the limestone wall, completely surrendering his incredible weight to the solid strength of the earth. The thick cave bear hide shifts softly around him, the dense, heavy fur wrapping tightly against the sudden, mild drop in temperature as he moves away from the firebird. He rests his hands completely in his lap, letting his heavily muscled arms go entirely limp, his broad chest rising and falling in a deep, unbroken rhythm of perfect peace. He looks down at the small clay pot resting in the shadows, watching the thick, black pitch slowly, gradually begin to cool in the calm, motionless air of the sanctuary. The heavy, slow-moving bubbles of boiling resin become smaller and less frequent, the incredibly viscous liquid settling down into a smooth and undisturbed, dark mirror. As the extreme heat slowly bleeds out of the tar, the incredibly rich, intoxicating aroma in the cave begins to subtly change its character once again. The sharp and bright, bitter notes of the boiling pitch soften, mellowing into a deep and earthy, almost honey-like sweetness that is infinitely relaxing. It is a heavy, sleep-inducing perfume, a natural, ancient incense that settles thickly over the man's exhausted nervous system, demanding that he close his heavy eyes and rest. He does not fight the overwhelming, narcotic pull of the scent, nor does he try to rush the slow, agonizing process of the cooling medicine. The Middle Paleolithic world has completely stopped moving, locked in a heavy, frozen stasis of falling rain, dying fire, and incredibly slow, methodical healing. He allows his thick eyelids to droop low once again, shutting out the soft, swaying shadows of the cavern, returning to the cool, restful darkness of his own mind. Outside, the heavy, freezing sheet of grey water continues to shatter against the ancient pine forest, a chaotic, deafening roar of absolute cold and violent wind. But inside, there is only the slow, rhythmic hissing of the dying embers, the soft, distant hum of the muffled rain, and the deep and heavy, unbroken breathing of a man who is entirely, flawlessly safe. The extraction is complete, the medicine is drawn, and now he simply waits for the heat to fade. The shadows in the farthest corners of the limestone cavern have grown deeper and thicker, and softer as the intense, vibrant life of the fired slowly begins to ebb. The blinding, radiant energy that once commanded the center of the cave has gracefully surrendered to a quiet, dying maturity. The coals are no longer a fierce, angry orange, they have settled into a dark and bruised, hypnotic cherry red. This fading light does not bring the biting cold back into the sanctuary, for the ancient stone walls have spent hours drinking in the immense thermal energy. The rock itself now radiates a steady and ambient, incredibly dry warmth, turning the entire cavern into a perfectly insulated pocket of deep, physical comfort. It is a soft, enveloping heat that presses gently against the skin, a heavy blanket of pure temperature that demands nothing but absolute, unmoving rest. Outside the mouth of the cave, the Pleistocene rain continues its endless, rhythmic assault upon the dark, frozen earth. The violent, chaotic energy of the storm has long since passed, replaced by a massive and constant, heavy downpour that shows no signs of ever stopping. The millions of freezing drops shatter against the limestone cliff in a continuous, deafening drone. A heavy wall of white noise that perfectly isolates the cavern from the rest of the ancient world. The man sits with his broad back, resting completely against the uneven, dusty stone, allowing the solid, unmoving strength of the earth to fully support his immense weight. His heavy eyelids are drawn low, casting a soft, dark shadow over his deeply set eyes, his gaze resting lazily on the small clay pot sitting just outside the reach of the dying embers. He does not rush the cooling of the dark medicine. He simply breathes, letting the slow, heavy passage of time do the gentle work for him. The small, hardened clay vessel sits perfectly still on the dusty floor, resting in a quiet twilight zone between the gentle warmth of the fire and the cool, damp shadows near the cave wall. The incredibly dense, completely black pool of birch bark pitch inside the pot has stopped its slow, heavy boiling. The extreme, violent heat of the extraction has successfully bled away into the cool limestone beneath it, leaving behind a perfectly calm, mirror-like surface. The heavy, intoxicating perfume of the hot resin still hangs thickly in the stagnant air, but it has lost its sharp, biting edge. The aroma is now a deep and earthy, profoundly sweet fragrance that coats the back of his throat with every slow, rhythmic breath he takes. It is the pure, concentrated smell of the Middle Paleolithic forest, a natural, ancient incense that acts as a heavy narcotic on his deeply exhausted nervous system. Very slowly, with the sluggish, dragging grace of a creature completely devoid of urgency, the Neanderthal begins to shift his heavy frame. The incredibly dense, thick fur of the cave bear hide rustles softly against his broad shoulders, a quiet, whispering friction that sounds like dry grass swaying in a gentle wind. He leans his massive torso slightly forward, peeling his scarred back away from the comforting support of the stone wall. He does not reach for the clay pot immediately. Instead, he lifts his uninjured left hand from his lap, moving his thick, soot-stained fingers with an agonizing, deliberate slowness. He reaches down into the pale, weightless dust near the edge of the firebird, his rough fingertips brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the charred oak spatula he had used to clear the white ash. He wraps his massive hand loosely around the wooden tool, feeling the deeply familiar, polished texture of the heavy oak resting perfectly against his calloused palm. He lifts the stick with a slow, effortless strength, the movement so fluid and calm that it barely disturbs the heavy, sweet-smelling air resting over the cave floor. He brings the blackened, flattened end of the wood over the small clay pot, pausing just an inch above the dark, glossy surface of the pitch. He allows his hand to hover there for a long, quiet moment, perfectly still, letting his heightened senses evaluate the invisible column of air rising from the tar. He can feel a gentle, soothing warmth radiating from the black liquid, a soft, concentrated heat that is entirely safe, entirely inviting. The blistering, dangerous thermal energy is completely gone, leaving only a perfect and heavy, medicinal warmth trapped within the dense resin, with a slow, controlled exhalation that makes a soft, hushing sound in the quiet cavern. He lowers the flat edge of the charred oak directly into the center of the dark pool. The thick, perfectly black tar offers a heavy, viscous resistance, a beautiful, sticky friction that feels deeply satisfying against the pressure of his hand. The pitch is no longer a thin, boiling liquid. It has cooled into a dense and heavy, incredibly sticky bomb. He turns the wooden handle slowly between his thick fingers, rolling the flat edge of the oak deep within the dark, sweet-smelling resin. The incredibly viscous pitch clings instantly to the charred wood, wrapping around the tool in a thick and heavy, unbroken layer of pure black medicine. He continues to twist the stick with a slow, hypnotic rhythm, gathering a massive, heavy dollop of the warm tar onto the end of the wood. When he finally begins to lift the tool away from the clay pot, the dark, heavy pitch resists, holding onto the pool below with a thick, sticky tenacity. A long and beautiful, completely black thread of the warm resin stretches upward, connecting the heavy dollop on the stick to the calm surface of the tar in the pot. It stretches higher and higher, a thin, glossy line of pure forest alchemy catching the soft, swaying red light of the dying coals. The long thread of dark pitch finally, silently snaps, falling heavily back into the clay vessel where it melts instantly and flawlessly, back into the smooth black mirror. The man brings the wooden tool closer to his broad chest, holding the thick, heavy mass of warm tar securely in the air. The incredibly rich, sweet scent of the birch resin immediately intensifies as it nears his face, a heavy, intoxicating cloud of healing perfume that forces him to close his eyes in pure sensory pleasure. He breathes the dark scent in deeply, holding the thick, fragrant air in his massive lungs, feeling a profound, physical wave of relaxation wash completely over his heavy body. The medicine is perfect. It is perfectly cooked, perfectly cooled, and completely ready to perform its silent, invisible work upon his torn flesh. He opens his dark eyes slowly, looking down at his massive, heavy right hand resting quietly in his lap. He turns the hand over with a slow, lethargic twist of his thick wrist, exposing his broad, heavily calloused palm to the soft, red glow of the firebed. Running diagonally across the thick, leathery skin is the deep, stinging cut from the slipped flint blade, a sharp, clean line of trauma surrounded by a dull, aching heat. The wound has been a constant, quiet companion since the sun went down, a steady, pulsing throb that has demanded a small, relentless fraction of his body's exhausted energy. The skin around the cut is tight and highly sensitive, radiating a localized fever that contrasts sharply with the deep, comfortable warmth of the surrounding cavern. He looks at the wound without a single trace of distress, knowing with absolute certainty that the pain is about to end. He brings the heavy wooden tool directly over his injured palm, hovering the thick, gathered mass of black pitch just a fraction of an inch above the deepest part of the cut. He does not hesitate, but he does not rush. He waits for a long, quiet breath, perfectly synchronizing his movement with the slow and heavy, unbroken rhythm of his deeply relaxed chest. As he slowly exhales, he lowers the blackened oak, pressing the thick, heavy dollop of warm birch tar directly against the stinging flesh of his palm. The immediate physical sensation is a profound, breathtaking shock of deep, localized comfort. The heavy pitch is wonderfully, perfectly warm, a thick, penetrating heat that instantly overwhelms the sharp, localized fever of the wound. The incredible viscosity of the black tar acts like a heavy, liquid blanket, completely suffocating the exposed nerves and instantly drowning the bright, stinging pain in a wave of dense, heavy warmth. He uses the flat edge of the charred oak to slowly, methodically spread the thick pitch across the entire length of the flint cut. The dark resin moves with a sluggish, heavy grace, smearing perfectly across his rough, calloused skin, filling the deep, narrow gap of the wound entirely. The incredibly sticky nature of the medicine creates a flawless, airtight seal, instantly cutting off the damaged tissue from the dry air of the cavern. The relief is absolute and immediate, and overwhelmingly profound. As the thick, sweet, smelling tar bonds tightly to his skin, the natural, ancient properties of the Middle Paleolithic alchemy immediately begin to take effect. The localized throbbing, the dull constant ache that had pulsed in time with his slow heartbeat simply melts away. It dissolves into the thick, warm pressure of the pitch, completely erased, leaving behind only a deep and heavy, wonderful numbness. He continues to spread the warm tar with a slow, hypnotic gentleness, ensuring that the heavy black balm completely covers every fraction of the damaged skin. The tactile sensation of the smooth, heavy pitch sliding over his rough palm is incredibly soothing, a repetitive, rhythmic pressure that lulls his exhausted mind further down into the dark. The sharp sting of the flint blade is completely gone, replaced entirely by the deep and heavy, sweet-smelling comfort of the forest. He lifts the wooden tool away from his hand, the thick, sticky pitch holding firm, refusing to release its tight, protective grip on his skin. A small, delicate thread of black resin stretches for a moment before snapping silently, leaving a smooth and glossy, perfectly black patch of heavy tar completely sealing the wound. The medicine is applied. The physical trauma is completely contained, thoroughly protected from the unseen dirt and the cold memory of the day. He slowly lowers the heavy oak tool, letting it rest completely on the dusty limestone floor beside his hip, his thick fingers opening and releasing the handle entirely. He does not need the tool anymore. The slow, methodical work of the deeply ancient knight is entirely finished. He turns his massive right hand slightly, catching the soft, dying red light of the fire on the smooth, glossy surface of the black pitch covering his palm. He flexes his thick fingers very slightly, testing the heavy, stiff resistance of the cooling tar. The pitch holds perfectly a flexible, incredibly strong secondary skin that bends smoothly with the movement of his heavy muscles, refusing to crack or break its airtight seal. The deep, heavy warmth of the medicine continues to sink downward into his flesh, a localized, concentrated heat that sends a slow, powerful wave of deep relaxation radiating up his thick forearm. He takes a long, incredibly deep breath, pulling the sweet, heavy scent of the birch resin directly from the back of his hand into his broad lungs. As he exhales, the long, drawn-out breath carries with it the very last, lingering remnants of the day's exhausting tension. The complete absence of pain acts as a final, heavy key, unlocking the deepest, most profound reserves of physical rest within his massive, powerful body. The heavy, knotted muscles at the base of his thick neck, tight from hours of carrying the immense weight of the hunt through the freezing rain, completely dissolve. They turn incredibly soft, losing all of their rigid, unyielding tension, allowing his broad, heavy head to tilt slowly, lazily backward. The deep, jagged limestone wall catches the back of his head with a hard and solid, unquestionable support. His immense, broad shoulders slump heavily downward, completely surrendering to the overwhelming, invisible pull of the Earth's gravity. The thick, dense cave bear hide settles more securely around his thick chest, the heavy, comforting weight of the animal fur pressing down on him like a massive, warm embrace. He feels as though his entire body is physically melting, slowly sinking down into the soft, completely dry, pale dust of the cavern floor. The deep, heavy relaxation travels downward, pouring through his thick torso, unlocking the tight, rigid posture of his heavy spine. The solid, unmoving strength that he carries through the brutal, freezing environment of the Ice Age simply evaporates, entirely unnecessary in the perfect, unquestionable safety of the sealed sanctuary. His heavy legs, crossed beneath him in the dust, go completely limp, the massive muscles turning soft and heavy and entirely immobile. Even the small, hidden tensions of his deeply weathered face begin to completely wash away. The heavy, protective furrow of his thick brow smooths out, completely releasing the vigilant, watchful intensity that marks every moment spent outside the cave. The tight, unyielding clench of his heavy jaw slowly unlocks, his mouth parting just slightly as his breathing becomes even deeper, even slower, even more profoundly rhythmic. He rests his heavy, fully treated right hand completely on the dark fur covering his lap, the thick, black patch of birch pitch continuing to radiate its dull, soothing heat into his palm. The left hand comes to rest gently beside it, his massive, soot-stained fingers completely uncurled, entirely devoid of any urge to grasp, to build, or to defend. He is entirely undone by the heavy, sweet-smelling warmth, entirely conquered by the absolute, unbroken safety of the ancient night. He allows his thick, heavy eyelids to close completely, shutting out the soft and swaying, bruised red light of the dying coals. The deep, restful darkness behind his eyes is incredibly cool, incredibly vast, a quiet, empty space that perfectly mirrors the heavy, profound silence of the sheltered cave. Without the visual anchor of the firelight, his heavy body feels perfectly weightless, floating gently in a warm, dry ocean of completely motionless air. Outside, the Pleistocene storm has settled into a permanent, unchanging state of heavy, endless rain. The millions of freezing drops continue to hammer against the jagged limestone cliff, but the sound is no longer a roaring chaos. It is a deep and heavy, rhythmic hum that vibrates entirely through the solid rock. It is a massive, crushing wall of white noise that pushes the rest of the harsh, terrifying world completely away, leaving only the tiny, perfectly safe pocket of the warm cavern. Inside the deep acoustic chamber, the only sounds that remain are the heavy, muffled drumming of the distant water, the tiny, microscopic settling of the pale, white ash, and the deep and slow, unbroken rhythm of the man's exhausted breathing. He is entirely enveloped in the heavy, intoxicating perfume of the ancient medicine, entirely wrapped in the comforting, dense heat of the thick fur hide. The dull, stinging H of the flint blade is completely gone, erased by the thick, sweet-smelling black pitch. The freezing, bitter bite of the ice wind is completely blocked by the massive, unbroken strength of the stone. There is absolutely nothing left to fight, absolutely nothing left to build, and absolutely nothing left to feel, but the overwhelming and deep physical gravity pulling him softly, gently downward, He does not move. He does not think. He simply exists in the heavy and warm, perfectly scented dark, completely surrendered to the overwhelming power of the earth's quiet healing. The profound, mesmerizing alchemy of the Middle Paleolithic night is finally, completely finished, leaving nothing behind but the deep and heavy, irresistible approach of a long, unbroken sleep. The bruised, cherry-red glow of the fire has held the encroaching dark at bay for hours, but even the deepest, most resilient heat of the Middle Paleolithic night must eventually surrender to the shadows. The transition is not sudden. It is a slow, agonizingly gentle fading, a quiet retreat of light that happens, so gradually the human eye can barely track the shift, the brilliant, vibrant energy that once danced across the jagged limestone walls has completely exhausted itself, leaving behind only the softest, most delicate memory of illumination. Deep within the center of the pale, perfectly smooth mound, the hidden core of the embers begins to lose its solid, burning structure. The heavy, carbonized pieces of the ancient pine logs, baked down to their absolute limits, finally collapse under the immense, crushing weight of their own exhaustion. They do not snap. They do not break with a sharp, violent sound. They simply fold inward, crumbling silently into the soft, weightless bed of the white ash. With each microscopic collapse of the dying wood, the deep red light in the cavern dims just a fraction more. The long, peaceful shadows that have been resting near the rear walls of the sanctuary begin to stretch, slowly creeping forward across the dusty floor. They move with a heavy, liquid grace, swallowing the rough edges of the stone, blanketing the discarded oak tool, and gently washing over the small clay pot that holds the cooling birch bark pitch. The visual world of the cavern is gently, methodically shutting down. The harsh, contrasting lines of the rough earth are smoothed over by the deepening dark, turning the entire interior of the cave into a soft, formless expanse of absolute, undisturbed quiet. The Neanderthal does not open his heavy eyes to watch the light fade. He does not need to see the dark to know that it is arriving. He can feel the subtle, calming shift in the atmosphere pressing gently against his relaxed face. The intense, blistering radiant energy that once poured directly from the open coals has faded entirely. It has been replaced by a much softer, ambient warmth that emanates from the limestone itself. The thick, solid rock of the cave has spent the entire evening silently absorbing the fierce thermal energy of the fire, drinking the heat deep into its dense, ancient mass. Now, as the fire dies, the earth gives that heat back. The walls of the sanctuary radiate a steady and invisible, incredibly dry warmth that perfectly maintains the temperature of the enclosed space. It is a heavy, enveloping heat, a complete 360-degree blanket of physical comfort that wraps around his massive frame. There are no cold drafts, no freezing pockets of air near the floor, no chilling dampness creeping in from the outside. The environment is flawlessly controlled, a perfect, unchanging pocket of pure safety suspended in the middle of the Ice Age. Outside the thick, protective barrier of the rock, the immense power of the Pleistocene storm has finally begun to break. The massive, chaotic energy that drove the terrifying winds and the endless sheets of heavy, freezing water has completely spent itself against the unyielding strength of the ancient pine forest. The violent, howling wail of the wind has died down to a soft, exhausted sigh that barely rustles the heavy, wet branches of the trees. without the driving force of the wind. The hammering rain that battered the jagged cliff face slowly begins to lose its crushing, overwhelming weight. The deafening, continuous roar of millions of shattering drops softens, breaking apart into individual rhythmic sounds. The heavy, freezing sheet of grey water from the beginning of the night, the storm that threatened to drown the entire valley, has been reduced to a gentle and steady, perfectly rhythmic patter. The new sound of the rain is infinitely more soothing than the violent drone that preceded it. It is a delicate musical tapping against the solid stone, a soft, repetitive whisper that echoes gently through the deep river valley. Thousands of tiny, perfectly formed drops fall from the saturated canopy of the pines, splashing softly into the deep, muddy pools of the forest floor. Water continues to trickle down the rough face of the limestone cliff above the cavern entrance, falling in a steady, unbroken line to strike the stones below. Plink, plink, plink. The sound is incredibly consistent, a natural, ancient metronome that perfectly measures the slow, heavy passage of time. It is a hypnotic, deeply relaxing acoustic rhythm, a heavy lullaby sung by the earth itself to coax the exhausted mind into the deepest, darkest waters of sleep. Inside the deep acoustic chamber of the cave, this gentle tapping is the only sound that filters through from the outside world. It perfectly complements the slow and rhythmic, unbroken breathing of the resting man. His chest rises and falls with a heavy, mechanical consistency entirely synced to the quiet, dripping cadence of the softening rain. He breathes in the warm, dry air deeply and exhales with a long and soft, hushing sound that barely disturbs the silence. The heavy, intoxicating perfume of the Middle Paleolithic alchemy still lingers in the stagnant air of the cavern, but it too has softened, losing its dominant, overwhelming intensity. The sharp, bright notes of the hot pine resin and the boiling sap have completely faded, leaving behind only the deepest, most earthy bass notes of the cured pitch. It smells faintly of damp earth, old wood smoke, and a distant, dark sweetness that is incredibly soothing to the mind. The scent no longer demands his attention. It has become a natural, permanent part of the sanctuary's atmosphere, a familiar, comforting background note that simply confirms the absolute safety of the space. His broad nose takes in the subtle fragrance automatically, processing the quiet signal of the completed medicine without waking his deeply resting consciousness. The air is perfectly still, perfectly warm, and flawlessly calm. His massive, powerful body has surrendered entirely to the overwhelming, crushing pull of the Earth's gravity. The thick, incredibly dense fur of the heavy cave bare hide presses down upon him like a heavy, weighted stone, anchoring his exhausted frame securely to the dusty floor. The sheer physical weight of the animal pelt is profoundly comforting, a continuous, full body pressure that signals to his central nervous system that he is completely hidden, completely protected. The deep, heavy relaxation that began in his neck and shoulders has now completely saturated every single muscle and tendon and heavy bone in his immense body. His broad back rests perfectly flush against the uneven limestone wall, the solid rock holding him up effortlessly so that his own muscles do not have to exert even the slightest fraction of energy. His heavy legs are entirely numb, resting limply in the dry, powdery dust of the cavern floor, totally disconnected from the waking world. His massive right hand rests quietly in his lap, the thick, calloused palm facing slightly upward in the dark. The dark, glossy patch of birch bark pitch covering the deep flint cut has completely cooled, hardening into a thick and flexible, perfectly airtight seal. The ancient medicine holds the damaged flesh together with an unyielding, protective grip, locking out the air, the dirt, and the cold. The sharp, stinging bite of the blade is nothing more than a distant, forgotten memory. In its place, there is only a dull and heavy, incredibly soothing warmth that radiates slowly from the pitch into the deep tissue of his hand. It feels as though he is holding a smooth and heavy, sun-baked stone against his palm, a localized pocket of deep physical comfort that continuously pushes the last remaining traces of tension out of his forearm. His left hand mirrors the right, resting completely open and lifeless on the dark fur of his lap. His thick, soot-stained fingers are slightly curled, entirely relaxed, the heavy joints completely unlocked. The immense, crushing grip strength that he relies upon to survive the brutal Pleistocene environment has been completely powered down, leaving his hands as soft and still as the pale, white ash sleeping in the fired. The heavy, knotted tension in his jaw remains entirely released, his mouth parted just enough to allow the slow, rhythmic passage of his deep, even breaths. His facial muscles are completely slack, erasing the deep, harsh lines of vigilance and survival that normally mark his features. In the soft, absolute dark of the cave, his face is perfectly smooth, a portrait of profound, unbroken peace. The boundaries of his physical body slowly begin to blur, as his deeply exhausted mind drifts further and further away from the waking world. The sensation of his heavy back pressing against the stone, the feeling of the thick fur resting on his chest, the dull, warm pulse of the medicine on his hand, all of these separate physical inputs slowly merge into a single, unified feeling of heavy, numb warmth. He feels as though he is slowly dissolving into the dry, dusty floor of the cavern, melting seamlessly into the ancient stone that surrounds him. He is no longer a separate, struggling creature fighting against the harsh, freezing reality of the Ice Age. He is simply a part of the quiet, resting earth, indistinguishable from the heavy rock, the sleeping dust, and the dying embers. His awareness of the vast, external world shrinks, rapidly pulling inward, until his entire universe consists of only the small, incredibly safe space immediately around him. The dark pine forest, the heavy, freezing river valleys, the distant, snow-capped mountains, they all cease to exist in his mind. There is only the cave. There is only the warm, dry air. There is only the slow, rhythmic beat of his own exhausted heart. The last, microscopic fragments of the red coals finally blink out entirely, swallowed completely by the pale, suffocating blanket of the white ash. The very last trace of light vanishes from the cavern, plunging the enclosed space into an absolute and flawless, impenetrable blackness. It is a perfect dark, a deeply restful void that offers zero visual stimulation, allowing his heavy eyes to completely rest. Without the light, the silence of the cave feels even heavier, even more profoundly thick. The distant, gentle tapping of the softening rain outside becomes the sole anchor to reality, a quiet, rhythmic metronome that guides him slowly downward. The sound is so steady, so perfectly consistent, that his brain simply stops processing it as an external noise, absorbing it into the internal rhythm of his own descending sleep. His breathing slows even further. The inhalations become incredibly long, pulling the sweet, earthy air deep into the very bottom of his massive lungs. The exhalations stretch out a slow, gentle release of air that seems to last for an eternity. His chest rises, his chest falls. A heavy, rhythmic tide in the dark. The warm, localized pulse of the birch tar on his palm fades into the background, joining the numb, heavy comfort of his resting limbs. The thick, dense weight of the cave bear hide holds him firmly in place. The solid, ancient stone supports his heavy back. The dry, powdery dust cradles his tired legs. He is perfectly safe. He is perfectly warm. He is entirely at peace. The thoughts in his mind slow to a heavy, sluggish crawl, losing their shape and structure, breaking apart into soft, formless impressions of warmth and dark. The awareness of the rain slips away. The awareness of the stone slips away. The awareness of his own heavy body slips away. There is only the dark, a deep and heavy, flawless dark. A quiet, ancient dark. His breathing becomes a soft, shallow whisper. The heavy rhythm of sleep takes complete control. The ice age rests outside. The fire sleeps in the ash. The healing pitch seals the flesh. Everything is quiet. Everything is still. Everything is done. Sleep. Deep, heavy sleep. Absolute rest. Silence.